You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Howdy, howdy. Welcome to Necropolis. We are back with another ranking today. So the ranking that we have chosen will be a specific year of 1994 for black metal, which is arguably the best year for black metal. I understand that 1993 was also very strong, and if you were to factor in the demos and EPs and all that came out in 1993, it definitely contends against 1994. But the focus today will just be on full-length albums. That made it very visible when I compared 1993 to 1994, that 1994 had the most quality release in a full-length format. So today we will be doing a tiering as we did from last week when we did the best recent extreme metal albums. This will just be getting into the classics here essentially and seeing what all of our opinions are and ranking the various albums. And there's a lot of gems in here that I'm really, really excited to get into. So we have Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Thank you, Shelly, for joining.
Hello, yeah, looking forward to getting into some of these great albums and some not so great.
And we also have the infamous Tyler, who was up late last night recording vocals for some death metal. Thank you, Tyler.
You're welcome. Glad to be back.
And as always, we have the Portuguese psychologist, mysticism guy, Rafael from Portugal, of course. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes, sir. Always great to have you. So the first band on today's list, I believe, is that Abigor. So I'm probably going to have the divergent opinion here about Abigor. I view them as a Satyricon-ish band, and I kind of view Satyricon as a poor man's take on Norwegian black metal. So don't flay me alive just yet, because I do have some logic behind why I've never been able to get into Abigor. Really cool riffs. The songs are just fucking disjointed as fuck, just like Satyricon. I would say the riffs are actually stronger in the Abigor, which makes it even more of a travesty when there's just tempo changes that don't really go with the flow of the song, different types of colors of the riffs that don't really mesh with the riffs that came before. I wouldn't say it's complete riff salad, but it does verge on my quibbles with Satyricon. So judging by we are ranking the classic albums today, I would put the Abigor firmly between a C and a D. They do have some strong riffs, good aesthetic here and there, but when it comes to the flowing natures of the songs, there's a huge disconnect, and I can't get past it. I've never been able to get into Abigor. I do not ever want to listen to them again, and I just feel that there's just too much of a disconnect. Go ahead, Shelley.
Okay, I thought we were going to diverge a little bit more than that, because I love Abigor, but I think based on the quality of the albums we have before us and where this album in particular stands, I was going to rank it as a C at the highest, but my angle on it was going to be much kinder, in that the reason I really like Abigor is because they offer an alternative interpretation of what the Scandinavian bands were doing with black metal, in that all the same aesthetic elements are there, but they really lean into the medieval kind of style. A lot of their riffs have this quite simplistic flowing melodic information, but it is delivered in vignette form, in short form. As you alluded to, they are quite riff salady, and where you see it as it doesn't really connect up, I see it as they're unpacking lots of different kind of little musical chunks and little ideas and sort of knitting them together, a little bit like you imagine pre-classical medieval music to do at times, where it's not taking on a narrative form in any kind of grand macro scale. There's just sort of lots of flowing ideas, and that can be captivating in its own way. And I think that's the reason why I definitely rate this as a C. But I also think the next two albums from Abigor were much stronger in that regard. So yeah, I'd be happy with it being a C. But yeah, my impression from them is obviously much more positive than yourself, Jason.
Yeah, it definitely appears that way. I mean, you're the one who wanted to include them, so
I did, yeah.
Tyler, what are your thoughts on Abigor? Oh, specifically this album.
My thoughts mirror yours almost exactly, Jason. I think that Abigor oftentimes falls into the trap of thinking that some sort of development or a contrasting theme is one that's simply different from its predecessor, which creates that disjointed feeling that you were mentioning. And I think that oftentimes the only semblance of order you can find in an Abigor piece is a return to, oh my gosh, the first riff. Um, so it ends up, because of that, being something that doesn't quite have as powerful of moments as superior black metal albums. And so I would be a little hard pressed to even call it a C. It's not bad. So because it's not bad, I also would be somewhat hard pressed to call it a D, let alone an F. So I think it's where you placed it is just about perfect.
Okay, Raphael.
I'm a bit more positive than you and Tyler. I do believe that their next album, Naktiman, was their best, but even on this one, I don't think they are as disorganized as you put them. I do believe that there's some ingenious songwriting even beneath those, well, at first seemingly disparaging song constructions. But in any case, and I think Shelley made a good point regarding the company of the albums that we are judging. So I guess yeah, C is pretty good for this one.
All right, so yeah, I'll put it up to a C. I think that's the general consensus. I know Tyler and I would put it between a C and a D, but you and Shelley definitely put it in C territory, so I'll just move it up to a C. So Abruptum, long Latin title for this album. It's another one of those bands that I tried to get into early on when I was like 16, 17, really getting in black metal. And I could appreciate like the artistic kind of direction they wanted to take it. And it's something about black metal, as I've realized as I've gotten older, is black metal has a lot of different types of application, not necessarily just like the Darkthrone, tremolo riffing and all that. There's all kinds of applications that can be applied to. You can get super avant-garde, you can get death metal-y, you can get all these different types of expression, which made it a prime target for the shoegaze indie rocksters to, make indie rock black metal, but just because black metal is so amorphous, especially when you look at like all the different types of expressions that came out throughout the years, different countries and all of that. There's a lot of, varying, completely like 180 takes on black metal expression. And this is one of those albums with the Abruptum. However, I just feel that it's not very musical. And they try to paint this very dark and ominous type of atmosphere, but it doesn't do anything for me on a musical level. And because I don't view it as music, I would put it as an F.
Oof. I wasn't expecting that, given the preamble.
Yeah, if there was actually music in it, it would be a lot better.
Yeah.
It's just scary, like Halloween soundtrack shit. So,
I
yeah,
mean,
they do have. Okay, I'll give them a D. They do. It's called It, right, Shelley?
yeah, the members It and all.
I think he passed away, right?
Yeah, it's still going. It's just the guy from Marduk. He released a couple of like dark ambient albums under the name, but it's sort of been active for quite a few years now. But yeah, it's still technically an entity. But to come back to your point on black metal, I think that's one of the great like contradictions or conflicts at the heart of my thoughts on black metal, because one of the reasons I rate Abigor possibly more than yourself and Tyler is because they're a really good example of highly riff-based melodic organization within black metal. I wouldn't call them experimental, at least in the era that we're talking about. And I really like that. And I really like very strict formalism within black metal. But you're right that it is also explicitly avant-garde at times and very experimental when you look at, what like the French acts were doing and Mutilation and some of the Norwegian acts and some of the American acts as well, like Black Funeral, have a really big experimental streak. But for me, experimental doesn't necessarily mean a free-for-all. There has to be some overarching logic. And for me, Abruptum are one of these acts that looks good on paper. Like, oh, let's do really long, extended, essentially noise pieces or sound art and record it. So you're right that it shouldn't really be considered a piece of music. It's more a piece of performance art with the aesthetic of black metal. So you've got the vocals, you've got drums and like some, guitar noise and various bits of like ancillary sonic furniture going on. But ultimately, we can't look at it as a black metal album. It's not something I would stick on and listen to with the same motivation that I would an Abigor. It's more like an expression of something, of an idea, but once it's been expressed, it doesn't really have any lasting appeal after that. It's just like, oh yeah, you can use black metal for some sort of extreme avant-garde statement, but there's no lasting value there. Like, I don't really get what we were supposed to glean from this beyond that statement. And I think it's a bit of a shame that no one's really run with this idea properly in any compelling way to try and marry noise and sound art with black metal. There's been some attempts over the years, but nothing all that convincing. And I think it's one of these great sort of empty spaces within the genre. But like I said, the contradiction is I would actually much rather listen to very rigid, creative riffcraft over this. So yeah, that's a very meandering way of me saying I'm happy with it being a D. I wouldn't put it as an F because I do think there is novelty here.
So I kind of am with the consensus here on this album as well. It's very simple elements, which granted, in much of black metal, some of the power comes from the fact that there is genius songwriting contained within deceptively simple elements. But here, the whole is simple to the point that there isn't much communication happening beyond a dark aesthetic. And because of that, as much as at some points in my life I really wanted to like this band, there wasn't anything in the music to make me want to return to it. So I think a D is a perfect rating for the Abruptum album.
All right. Raphael.
Well, I think you guys already said the essential. I believe that is as a gallery of interesting, exciting, sometimes terrifying sounds. This mostly works, but as a structured piece of music, it's pretty lacking. And another thing that I found a bit unsatisfying about it is that it doesn't, despite all of the some of the interesting sections, it doesn't really build towards anything in particular. There's not really a sense of it comes down to a sense of structure, which I think is lacking here. So I'm not sure. Well, I guess D is okay. I think it's not an F because it is efficient at times. I think that the textures that do pop up from time to time are somewhat very well accomplished, and the atmosphere that they create, as an exercise in pure atmosphere, it does work sometimes. But as an album, as a structured form of music, it's not really as good. So yeah, I think it's good where it is.
Damn,
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Sorry, Jason.
I was just amazed we all agreed it's a D. I mean, I kind of rated it as an F because of the lack of musical content, but and kind of just like the novelty of it, I put it as a D. Go ahead, Shelley.
I was just going to say, Raphael, you really hit the nail on the head there by describing it as a gallery because, yeah, you can walk into each room and think there's lots of compelling, interesting images. But unlike a lot of the albums on this list, it doesn't take you on a journey. It's just a series of suggestions with no overarching structure, which is why it should be ranked lower than some of the other albums here.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I put this in alphabetical order. So now we're on ancient, and these A bands, they do not do it for me at all. So ancient, I know they're very proficient. I know a lot of people hold this band in high regard. I've never personally been able to get into them. I do have a funny anecdote, which will probably piss off some people, but in San Antonio, there's a band called Ancient Malice, and their logo literally just ripped off ancient from the band ancient and put the word malice underneath it. And yeah, I think I played a couple shows with them in the past, doing the go craft. But ancient, I've never been able to get into them. I don't have any quibbles with the music. It just doesn't speak to me. I know it's competent. But yeah, and yeah, it's a nothing burger for me. So, being that I'm not compelled by it in any way or form, I am going to put it. I understand it's competent, so I'm not going to put it in a D, but I am going to put it between a C and a D. And I understand this is blasphemy for some people, but this band has never spoken to me, so that's personal opinion on that. Go ahead, Shelley.
Uh, yeah, I'd probably put it as a C. I think for us, well, we are discussing this album and this album alone. Ancient became more of a sort of hokey Cradle of Filth type band after this. But on this album, they do nail the particular atmosphere of quite dirty primal black metal, but with overtones of like mysticism and very compelling dark atmospheres. But they weren't doing anything that you can't already get from some of the more competent bands from the Norwegian scene. So for me, it's like, out of all the sort of the whole cornucopia of metal, black metal is my wheelhouse. So I can listen to it done well all day, every day. I absolutely adore it. So this album, it fits the bill when I just want to stick something on in this oeuvre. But ultimately, it doesn't really go beyond what a lot of the other bands were doing. There's elements of like the first Immortal album. There's elements of Burzum, a little bit of Darkthrone in there. They have more of a sense of melody than some bands. They can write a really compelling riff now and then, but there's no like overarching intelligence behind it. It's just a series of sort of well played black metal pieces, but it doesn't really go beyond that as far as artistry is concerned.
Where would you put it?
I would rank it a C. I'd probably put it higher than a D because I think it's still quality black metal, just not up there.
All right, Tyler.
Oh, here we go again. All of my favorite albums downgraded by the rest of the team. That's all right. I would give this album an A. I'm a very big fan of this album.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that.
Definitely fits into kind of my personal taste of something that's very straightforward and almost just a direct flow of melody. I think that it has an almost gentle take on sort of the darker aspects of nature seen in a compassionate light, some sense of contrast that can be almost breathtaking at times. So I listen to this album quite frequently, and it's one of my favorites. So yeah, I would put it as an A.
Interesting. Raphael.
I'm more towards your guys' opinion. I think it's a pretty solid album. It's competent, but I think Shelley covered the essential when it comes to it. It's ultimately a bit derivative from bands that did it better in pretty much all of the aspects that it explores. But because it's still a relatively well done album, I will put it at the C.
All right, I think that averages out in between a B and a C.
Yeah.
And I do understand a lot of people love this album. It just hasn't spoken to me personally. The next album I do like quite a bit. So this is the Beherit, the first ambient electronic album. Which I consider it black metal in spirit, which is why it's here. Plus, Drawing Down the Moon came out a year before this. So being that electric doom synthesis is like the mature form of this album. Like this album laid out the raw expression of what Marco was going for, but Electric Doom Synthesis was taking that to the potential of what this album is. I still enjoy it a lot, but I view it as not as good as Electric Doom Synthesis. But I believe there's some quality in here, especially some of the lines that Marco says in there. And being that I've met Marco Lejo, been to his house, recorded music with him, and I've been in contact with him for years, I can totally see him creating this album. Just the type of personality that he has. And I love it immensely, just because of the subjective side, but I also like some of the motifs and things that he's able to conjure up. And I do think it's above average, so I'm placing it as a B. I know it's not as well refined as Electric Doom Synthesis, but honestly, I would put Electric Doom Synthesis as a timeless classic and an S tier. So, yeah, a B for the first electronic Beherit album. How about you, Shelley?
Well, I think it really speaks to your point on Abruptum as well, is that black metal isn't necessarily isn't necessarily limited to metal. It can be expressed through other genres and other techniques, because this still feels like listening to a black metal album, even though it's entirely electronic and ambient. And it's sort of to sort of draw out the Abruptum comparison a little bit more. I think it succeeds far more at conveying that sense of eerie, surrealist darkness than Abruptum does. And also retaining a sense of telos, a sense of structure and purpose. I obviously concur that the follow-up was the superior album. I think this album as well is kind of, you've got to love it for its like hokiness at times. Like there are moments that do still make me chuckle on here, but in a good way, in a way that's like, I got to admire just going from Drawing Down the Moon to this, where it is just, some of it's so minimal to be almost amusing. Some of the vocal passages I do find quite funny, but also weirdly terrifying at the same time. So yeah, it holds a very personal place in my heart. But if I'm being brutally honest, I can't rank it above a C. I think it's too unfocused. It's too unfinished in my view, and I can't help but compare it to the follow-up. And again, if we're ranking it on a scale compared to some of the other albums on offer here, I'm going to go with C.
Should have ranked it higher so it evens up. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the latter part of Shelley's analysis. I think that there is some quality songs here, like Fish and Tribal Death and Escape, that really take an interesting approach to, I suppose, what you could call electronic music, where they take sounds almost as self-justifying individual elements, kind of like a volume gradient applied to a distorted keyboard almost becomes a song element rather than just an aesthetic choice. But to me, and I'm going to be much more harsh in this regard, some of the songs are ham-handed, and there can be some things that almost sound like filler. And because because of the use of sometimes very simple devices, it can be a little boring at times. I think that they needed to inject into this sound some more narrative variation, which I think they accomplished on the follow-up, which is also one of my favorite albums. So this album, I would I would place it exactly where Shelley put it. I would put it as a C.
Raphael.
Well, I think that in the discography of Beherit, the best way to describe this album in that context is embryonic or preparatory. I think he covers some ground here that will later be fleshed out in a much better way and in a much more structured way in the next album, which I think is a great one and probably one of the best of its kind. But this one here, I think what I said about Abruptum applies here, that sense of a gallery or a series, a collection, a bundle of suggestions of spare part. It doesn't really feel. I don't have the feeling with this album that they're full songs in many cases. I think that the sounds and the themes that he explores are occasionally fascinating. I really like the type of the aura that he managed to conjure here. But in the end, I think we only get to see glimpses of that. I think the next album is the one where he really makes something substantial out of it. So for this one, I'm sorry, but I have to agree with the latter judgments. I'd also give it a C.
Well, Marco, if you're listening, I do not agree with these gentlemen today. I this is above average, just because from how left field it is. And I'm surprised it did not rank it higher just from that sheer aspect. Granted, the Abruptum is from left field as well, but they just nothing burger there. So next up is the Bethlehem, dark metal. Dark metal, as Shelley is aware, is what Mephitis is championing nowadays, as well as the Shadow Legion. But honestly, I never personally listened to Bethlehem. I understand this is also a classic amongst a lot of individuals who have been into extreme metal a long time, and they love Bethlehem a great deal. I know one person that's like their favorite album ever. But I am never compelled to. I've listened to it a few times throughout the years, and probably have not listened to it in 10 years. And I don't feel compelled to ever listen to it again. But I understand that it does have its merits, and they're from Germany, right, Shelley?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Germany wasn't releasing a lot of great metal back then. So just from that sheer fact that they're one of Germany's best, um, I will put them as a C. But the music doesn't speak to me as well. Go ahead, Shelley.
Yeah, I concur with a C. I think they were onto something with meshing really slow, drab doom metal with black metal. Uh, but I think they overplay their hand every time. So this album is an hour and 10 minutes long, which is quite rare for albums in the mid 90s, but I still think an hour is excessive for any album unless you're doing something really, really special. And for this, it's like I can listen to the first half and think, yeah, this is pretty cool. They're taking like really kind of basic raw black metal, injecting a sense of like gothic melodrama, some really kind of compelling theatrics, but they draw it out way too long. And I think as an example of this style done really well, but much more efficiently, I just looked to the first two Samael albums. I'd much rather listen to them than I would Bethlehem. So yeah, I think you have to give it a C for what they were doing. There weren't really any bands that sounded like this at the time, and for that alone, it warrants a degree of respect. But yeah, they massively overplay their hand, and this album is not special enough to warrant how long it goes on for. And yeah, you're right. Like I just checked them out on Metal Archives. This album, out of 6 reviews, has an average of 99%, which just seems baffling to me. But it is indicative of that fan base that seems to just absolutely adore them. But yeah, I don't see what they see. So it's a C.
Yeah, neither do I. And I put him in as a C just out of respect. Honestly, like I am just not compelled to ever revisit this album. Go ahead, Tyler.
I would also give the album a C. I think that it is competent, a word that's been used several times in this discussion, but I'm not really captivated by its attempted fusion of black metal and I don't know, British Gothic rock. Somewhat like a black metal version of My Dying Bride. And while it can be very well put together black metal at times, there's not really anything here to repeat a criticism that's been voiced before about other albums that makes me want to return to it. It's really just average and middle of the road for me. I would probably put it closer to a D, but like you, Jason, sort of out of respect for its context in the time period, and also because I think it is well put together for what it is. I think I could settle with a C.
All right. All right, Raphael, do you have a different opinion than what we've expressed?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm against the tide for this one. Well, I think the thing with this album is that even though, well, it's a metal album, I think we can agree on that, and it does use the vocabulary of riffs. It ends up being, I think that the mode of expression is very different from the rest of the albums on this list, the more conventional black metal albums. I think it's, in a sense, even though it's more structured than Abruptum, of course, it's still very texture based. I think the riffs are simply an instrument to bring about that ambience and that texture. And I do like what they come up with. I might agree that it's a bit drawn out and longer than it should be, but in terms of just pure atmosphere and textural exploration, I do like the aura that they create and the emotions. And I do think it's a more well-built album than what you guys think. So for me, it would be a B, but I guess that's futile now because with everyone voting it a C, it stays where it is, right?
Yeah, 3 C's versus a B is still a C. So, all right, cool.
S next.
I have never been able to
Yeah,
pronounce
S.
this album.
S next.
The Burzum, his tour Los or whatever. I've never been able to pronounce it. Can you pronounce it, Shelley?
Well, I can pronounce my version of it, but anyone Norwegian will probably want to hang me. But it's Hvis, lyset, os.
Taos. Yeah, I'll just say Taos. Yeah, we all agree this is S tier. And
Yep.
This album is not just one of the best black metal albums ever. It elevated black metal, in my opinion, to such a high level. And that Burzum guy, regardless of all the controversy, he was a freaking genius when it came to crafting riff craft and all kinds of wonderful textures and narrative structures. And there are some songs. I think there's only fucking 4 songs on this album, and one is fucking drawn out ambient. Tom had a song. But yeah, this album I view as Burzum's best. One of black metal's best albums ever. Granted, there is an album or two that we haven't gone to yet that I do listen to a lot more. But the Burzum, when I'm in the right freaking mood for it, it clicks on a really great level, and I do view it as the supreme expression of black metal. Once it does click when I'm listening to it. Can't say enough good things about this album. I view it as, all encompassing when it comes to the knuckleheadedness nature of black metal that came out this period, as well as transforming that into high expressions of art. It really shows what the medium of black metal is capable of when in the right hands. Yeah, just completely all around A plus, in this regard, it's an S, it's a timeless classic. Yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
Well, yeah, obviously I concur with everything you said. I'll try and keep my remarks short because obviously discussing this album is a bit like discussing Beethoven symphonies. It's hard to sort of come up with a new angle on it. But you have to. We've talked a lot of the preceding albums, the A's and the early B's. We've talked a lot about one band nailing the texture, another band maybe using some riffs but not really developing them or whatever. Here we have the kind of the paragon of how to do it right in terms of using texture as what I like to call like ornaments on a mantelpiece to sort of really bring to life what you're doing. But obviously the riffs are there, the structure is there, the arrangements, the composition, every single element marries up to like a perfect moment in music. And just to sort of the angle I'll take with this album today will just be to say it is also proof that you don't need to stuff every single moment with riffs, melodies, synths, blast beats, ideas. This album is so sparse, so like efficient with the ideas used Like sometimes a riff will be just two notes repeated ad infinitum, but the like furniture around it and the way it's delivered is so compelling, and the complexity of the ideas that kind of supervene on this simplicity is yeah, it is genius, and it's one of the reasons why you just cannot ignore Burzum and this album when you're talking about the history of black metal. And yeah, it marries the ambient atmospheric textures with what is still a highly riff based, as you described it, also knuckle-headed in a way, because some of the moments are knuckle-headed. It's just a barrage of blast beats and riffs, but they'll build to these moments of really compelling import, and then yeah, it sort of tails off with this like, you know, very extended ambient piece. So yeah,
when we
perfect
talk
album,
about
perfectly balanced in every way.
yeah, when we talk about like the transcendental potential of black metal, this album is a great example of that. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, Burzum here is a masterful sculptor of emotion and music. They, much like other artists that are able to reduce music to simply the most effective means of conveying an experience, are able to utilize simple motions in the most efficient way possible. I think it's really the sort of watershed moment for the genre, the challenge that I really think most of the genre backed down from, while there were plenty of good releases contemporaneous with it, as well as coming out afterwards. This album never really was answered in black metal. Every element of the album, from the aesthetics to the melodic composition to the song structure, has a purpose. It is used in the most effective way possible to communicate the theme. The sparseness that Shelley mentioned fits in perfectly with the idea of the sort of desolate melancholy that in the subject matter of the album is felt by someone who has some kind of longing for a world they never knew, but yet miss deeply. And I think that it is an album that, while I don't listen to it as often as other albums, that's because it is such a powerful piece of music that you have to be in the right mindset. It has to be listened to almost ritualistically. And if you're not in that right mindset, it can't simply be listened to as music to occupy your headspace. It can't simply be listened to as music for a background to some activity that you're doing. It has to be something that you listen to in a context in which it's going to impact you fully. So I agree with what I imagine is going to be the overwhelming consensus here, that this is an S-tier album and possibly the finest album, not only of black metal, but of almost every album or every release that in the entirety of heavy metal and all of its subgenres.
I don't know. When we talk about black metal, it's up there in the best ever. But metal as a whole, I'm unsure.
I would agree with Tyler on that. I know it might not be the popular opinion. I know it's like one of the most respected black metal albums going, but it's difficult to even sort of frame within words. But yeah, I've never been impacted by a piece of music like I have with this. So I think, yeah, it needs to sort of stand as like a testament to what metal as a whole is capable of expressing, not just black metal.
All right, Raphael, I presume you will be ranking this the same as us, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what is left to say here? This album has an almost mystical effect on me. Earlier on, we were discussing how the black metal spirit does not necessarily correspond to a certain form, and I think this album is an example of that in a very particular way. Even though the language is exactly, it's still within, it's firmly within black metal, the riffs, the blast beats, etc. I think it almost approaches something else in many ways. And of course, I'm not talking about the last song, for example, which is ambient music, but even the entirety of the album. For the most time, I don't really notice that there is playing riffs. It's more like, or that he's changing them. It feels like a continuous stream of music, a continuous stream of a single idea being unfolding. So yeah, I think this album, every praise is deserved. I think I completely buy into the hype in this case. And yeah, I do agree with what Shelley and Tyler were saying about placing it not just within black metal, but within metal in general. I think what this album achieves is something very rare. It's one of my favorite albums, I would say. So yeah, obviously this is the easiest choice for me in this whole list. It's an S.
Yeah, he does kind of have like an intuitive understanding, not just about the shape of the music and the riffs, but how the shapes communicate together. And it's a great example of how black metal should be done. And yeah, Burzum's probably in my top five favorite black or metal bands generally. Um, and it's because of this album. So yeah, I can see how you guys would say is one of the best metal albums ever released. When this album, I'm in the right mindset, like Tyler was saying, it does have a lot of transcendental potential in it. And yeah, once you're in that right, state of mind where you have the complete mundane aspect of reality cut out from what you're perceiving and you just focus straight on the music, it is a very transcendental experience. So I can't say that the next, the same about the next album here. The Cradle.
Right up to S as well, Jason. Go on. Next to Burzum.
He's just saying that because Danny Filth sent him a heartfelt personal message, and he feels
that was one of the most awkward videos I've ever seen. Just because you could tell his feelings were hurt and he was trying to be nice. And I commend the guy, but it just came out very cringy. But yes, the criticism that he said that he's creepypasta Iron Maiden is completely true. And yeah, this album, I tried to listen to it before the episode here, and I absolutely fucking hate it. The principle of evil made flesh. I looked up stuff that was going on around the year 1994 when this came out, and I understand why they got popular because they have the vampire aesthetic. And Interview with a Vampire, the movie of Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, came out that year, and yeah, I can see all like the single cat ladies out there, reading Anne Rice and say, "Ooh, what's this Cradle of Filth? Oh, they're vampires. Oh, wow!" And propelling this album higher than it should be in the mainstream consciousness. But yeah, it's definitely an F for me. And hopefully, I think this is a shared sentiment that it's an F for everyone here because this album has no. I'm sorry, Shelley, your country failed us. I understand America is not represented today on today's list, but you're England. You're proxy America for today, and you have failed us. You have failed us with the Cradle of Filth, and you should feel ashamed of yourself.
Well, I'm not going to apologize. Now, Cradle of Filth, little 13, 14-year-old me was big into them as like the gateway band. I'm not embarrassed to say that. Actually, the follow-up to this, Dusk and Her Embrace, is the far superior album, and I would actually be trying to go out and bat for that a bit more and make a case for it. This album, regardless, setting aside people's criticisms, people's justified criticisms of Cradle of Filth, it's clear they were still finding their voice on this album. They started out more of a death metal band. Here they were trying to marry some of that with some of the melodic death metal that was going on at the time, with the gothic thing, with elements of like Emperor, and obviously failing to kind of even craft this into a compelling vision that kind of speaks of this, hokey kind of gothic romanticism that was their aesthetic. So yeah, it does fail on every level. I would half-heartedly try and put it up to a D just because this album holds a place in my heart for being one of my gateways, but I accept that is purely sentimental. There is no intellectual argument I could make for raising it above an F, but I think Cradle of Filth holds a mass appeal because they work at that intersection between gothic rock, an element of black metal, Iron Maiden, and yeah, vampire lovers, and that intersection is quite a big portion of like the alternative population. So their popularity is not hard to understand, and you can see the germinal of that on this album. But even on its own terms, I would say it does fail. So I'll accept the F tier for this one.
I understand you're about like 3 years old when this album was released, so I'm not holding it against
Five.
you. You're
Five.
I understand you're a 5, in kindergarten or whatever they call that in the land of England. But yeah, I'm not blaming. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. You didn't know what your country was doing at that time. You're, with the Sesame Street. So don't take that personally when I said you should be ashamed of it. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
From creepypasta Iron Maiden to black metal Marilyn Manson, we have the most boring attempt at salesmanship ever. This band somehow decided that adding double bass kick to Iron Maiden was something novel, like every other boring band at Wacken Festival. And I can't say anything in defense of them on excuse me, I'm sorry, any of their albums, including this one. I remember seeing an interview with the vocalist of Primordial, in which I believe he spoke of how he used to be friends with Cradle of Filth, him and the rest of Primordial in the very early days of both of their projects. And he said that they had goals of creating a sort of romantic art that was representative of their respective cultures, Ireland and England. And he lost contact with them and kind of forgot about them over the years, and then checked back into what they were doing and saw the garish cover art and the half-naked women. And he got in contact with Danny Filth, and supposedly, don't want to be accused of slander here, he asked him, what is up with this? I thought we had sort of a vision we were aiming for, and now you've gone down this path. What are you doing? And supposedly Danny Filth's answer was, dude, I'm not going to be fucking poor forever. And I think
I've seen that interview, actually. Yeah.
I think that about sums up Cradle of Filth's entire career. So yes, F tier for me.
But also, ironically, he also ended up making quite a profound statement about English identity at the same time, in that it's like this combination of Iron Maiden, Victoriana, like Gothic melodrama, which, if you know anything about the Victorians, you know that they were big into like Gothic architecture and medieval history, but it was all kind of facsimiles of the same. And then Cradle of Filth, in a sense, are a facsimile of a facsimile, which kind of does sum up when you strip out Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland from the British thing, and you just look at England. It is kind of emblematic of our really problematic relationship with our sense of national identity in a way that other European countries don't really have. Not to take us too far, of course, sorry, but I do think that Cradle of Filth are a really good kind of representation of the kind of caricature that is English identity. So ironically, even though Primordial, the Republic of Ireland has a very strong sense of national identity, partly because, it was a colony of the British Empire for so long. So much of their identity was kind of invested in becoming an independent nation and like founding their own sort of national journey, whereas England has always kind of been nestled in this reputation of empire. So Cradle of Filth are almost like the perfect proxy for a lot of that. So although the naked shirt story is kind of a whimsical joke, it is also kind of telling of like the how to represent English identity within the medium of black metal. Sorry, that was probably a bit of a tangent, but yeah, it is interesting.
Then I agree with Jason. You should be ashamed if this is representative of your culture.
I am sorry. I can only apologize for my people.
Don't be so mean, Tyler. What are your thoughts, Raphael?
I don't think I have much to add here. I do think the next album is a generally good one, despite having all of the vices of this band, the cheesiness, the melodrama, etc. But to a lesser extent, and I think it's balanced by some generally good songwriting. But yeah, on this one, not really much to add. I think it's doesn't really have that much artistic value. I do think I'm a bit more positive on it. I would give it I wouldn't give it an F because I think there's some artistry in here beneath all of these vices. I think, for example, that whenever they're trying to do black metal, whenever they're trying to do the blast beats or whatever, it generally fails. But the more, let's say, when they stay away from that and do the more romantic keyboard-led melodies, I think it's very cheesy, but it's closer. I think it's more honest and it works better there. So yeah, a D for me.
They try to do box, staccato, and fugue, and they completely butcher it. They make it way more simple and less interesting. And why not just play the regular staccato and fugue?
Well, it's supposed to be a little, quotation. It's not.
They just really just dumbed it down. Like they were not competent enough to change like the actual expression.
I know, because Bach's Staccato and Fugue was like a meme before memes were a thing, and that little lick is a sort of, you immediately think gothic horror, and I think that's what Cradle of Filth were playing up to. They weren't making a serious artistic statement; they were doing a little musical joke, and I think that's the other aspect of this, is that the English can't really do black metal because we can't help but be too ironic or sarcastic, and we can't commit to the moment in that way. And again, I think Cradle of Filth are really demonstrative of that. But anyway, I can see we are now placing Transylvanian Hunger in the wrong position, so we can move on to that now.
Yeah, Darkthrone's for girls. And
oh, for God's sake, Jason!
Yes.
Here we go again. All right, don't cancel me. This is just an in joke. All right. So yeah, I see the quote from Raphael saying bizarre take. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit.
So I do like Darkthrone. That's why I rated them above average. They are ranked at B right now. Probably going to move up to an A once everyone says they're two pieces here. But there's a few things about this album that I really do not like. Granted, there are a lot of aspects I like a lot, but number one is just because they were the first at like really molding and making a presentable form of the simplistic black metal tremolo riffing style, just playing chord, there's a riff. Just because they're like the ones that really popularized that format, and thousands of others have emulated that, doesn't really push it into an A territory for me. There are some compelling songs on this album. It's not a bad album. That's why I rated it, above average. But when it comes to like some of the company that will be an A and S, I do not believe that the Darkthrone. Gorgoroth is coming up, for example, and I would place Gorgoroth way above Darkthrone, but not above the Burzum. So yeah.
So Jeff, can I just ask you a question? You say just because they're the first doesn't mean they should be praised for that. Are there any examples you can think of that go for this style that you think do it better than Transylvanian Hunger?
Honestly, the stylistic of the tremolo riffing is very similar to what Varg was doing. They just made it in a more accessible form, essentially, less intuitive. But yeah, the strumming of the tremolo and all that is those are the ones who really just made their whole expression about that. And yeah, they just really seem like I understand they're innovative in that aspect, but I think other bands, excelled further just by expanding their expression. But yeah, and there's also the Darkthrones for meme or girls memes and all that. So yeah,
yeah, you need to meet more women.
I've met a lot, Shelley.
So my take is, although I do, there are obvious similarities between this album and Burzum, and I think in the episode where I wanted to slaughter them as a sacred cow, we did mention that this was the album where they were really close to Varg, and Varg was giving them a lot of ideas as to how to develop their style. And I say this was really just a solo project almost. And it is very distinct from even Under a Funeral Moon, which still has, vestiges of the Celtic Frost kind of very sort of lo-fi thrash thing going on. But I think this album sort of stands apart in the Darkthrone discography. The reason I asked you that question, Jason, is because this album has probably been the most imitated within black metal. Like every week when I'm reviewing the albums for Hate Meditations, I come across at least a handful that are doing this thing. And that's 30 years on from its release. But at the same time, I don't think it's been bettered in that regard. I think not only was it the first to really nail the repetitive trance-like droning tremolo riffing with, sprinklings of melodic content throughout, and just the relentless mid-paced blast beats. But I also think it was the best. I think no album that has emulated this style has come close to what Darkthrone were doing here, and I think it is wholly distinct.
Well, what about A Transylvanian Funeral? Like, what about that?
No, they're much more. There's more of a diversity of riffs within a Transylvanian Funeral. There's more lyricism within.
Their name is obviously derived from A Transylvanian Hunger.
Well, there's obvious parallels, and there is a clear influence there. But I think a Transylvanian Funeral are much busier with riffs. The lyricism of the riffs and the melodic content is much catchier in a way. I think what Darkthrone were going for here was, again, that sparsity, that minimalism, which is, again, it's distinct from Burzum. I think even Burzum were not quite as minimal as this. Even on Vis lyset Taros, like there's some kind of single-mindedness here that really is compelling. And I think the only thing we could compare it to in that regard is Iljan, who's sadly been omitted here because his debut was 1995, who took it that one step further. But for me, this is sort of, not only is it ground zero, but it's also the archetype of how this style should be done well. And for that reason, I think it should be between S and A.
Tyler.
Well, I was going to say when Shelley asked, what band do you think did this style better? Burzum is my example, because I think
that's what I was thinking too. I mean, it's not that different. The style.
I think it's distinct enough to. So when I say bands that do that, so I'm thinking of like early Ulva or Judas Iscariot or something like that, where you can tell it's a bit of a knockoff. Like,
I agree with you too, Shelley, that out of the imitators of this album in particular, none of them have exceeded the quality of this album. But I do think that Darkthrone was trying, and I believe that possibly consciously, to sound more like Burzum on this album than their prior albums. And I think that they were using a very similar mechanic in the music, which is reducing music to just a sort of raw, shouldn't say raw, but reducing music to simply being like melodic movements that directly express like an emotional impact or an experience. And it's effectively done on this album in many parts. It was one of my, I guess you can say, gateway albums to Norwegian black metal. I still think that it's an excellent album. But I think that overall, it lacks some of the variation that creates more exciting music that out of the black metal Darkthrone albums, I think is most well done on Under a Funeral Moon. And while I don't think that necessarily the album can be entirely blamed for this, and we've already covered this ground in the prior episode that you referenced, the album did sort of create the template that became standardized black metal following it. And that's because it reduced the black metal to such simple elements that it was easy to imitate. So yeah, I would put Under a Funeral Moon higher. That's one of my personal favorite albums of all time. I would probably give this album between a B and an A, because it is a quality album, and it does have very powerful moments, very almost sublime moments at times. But really, it, like I said, kind of lacks that variation in structure that I find more compelling on the prior release. And for that reason, it doesn't really hit the same notes of quality that other releases on this list do for me.
Yeah. Raphael, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Shelley that this is different enough from Burzum to warrant a separate category. I think the similarities are there, of course, but for example, I think that when I listen to this album, the appeal is distinctively different from the one I get from the Burzum album that we rated. Yeah, well, I think the sound that Darkthrone, I think they nailed it here. What they were trying to explore, I think it's very effective at what it's trying to do. This very this almost an exercise in pure glacial atmosphere with very emotional, very catchy songs. Like Tyler was saying, I think that's a good description. Using reducing it to the music to the most simple elements and for a very direct form of emotional expression, where each riff has a very distinct, a very its own emotional nuance. Yeah, well, I think between B and A would be my rating for this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the general consensus. It's something that I've always, imagined it. Like the hipsters, they really love the Darkthrone. When the hipster stuff was going on, when they like Invisible Oranges and all that, they took over black metal for a while there, and Darkthrone was one of the bands that they really championed. I would assume because that format that is displayed on Transylvanian Hunger is so easy to emulate and imitate and all that, where you're able to actually do like an indie rock expression through it. And it turned into like a more urban type of nihilism, through music. So yeah, that's the way I've always viewed this album too, is more like, look at the Burzum, that is mythological, like nature. And really similar techniques but different expression, where the Darkthrone is more of like an urban nihilism. And I that's why probably the hipsters, the hipsters are very urban. But yeah, it's time to move on to the next album. So we have the Dawn. Dawn is personally a band I haven't been able to get into. I understand. I did listen to this album before the episode today, and I have listened to them before. And I had a friend online. He went by the name of Dawn because he likes this album so much. But honestly, it's competent stuff. There's good riffs here and there, but even compared to Darkthrone, there's a lot lacking in it. And just it's not really unique. And I would say it's very average. So yeah, it's a C for me.
Sure.
Wait until
So,
Rotting Christ. Once we get to Rotting Christ, you're gonna fucking hate me, Shelley. Go ahead.
so in more recent years, I've come to really love this style of black metal. I guess we all agree that like Sacramentum's Far Away from the Sun is like the benchmark that we're judging this from, and we discussed that quite a lot in our discussion of Dissection. But the Swedish style of highly melodic, riff-based black metal, where it is just a constant stream of riffs, and it does borrow from heavy metal melodicism in a way. There is that kind of euphoria that kind of puts it at odds with the Norwegian and the American and other European styles of black metal. But I think when it's done well, it is really, really good. And I'd put Dawn as like the next band you should listen to after Sacramentum. And there's sort of more like lower quality bands that I still think are worth a shot, like Hvis and Vinterland and things like that. But this album, I think, is probably the best Dawn album, and I really love Dawn. Like, I've come to really love them in recent years for just nailing this really tightly constructed riff administration and combining the feral kind of animalism of black metal with a very sophisticated sense of almost neoclassical melodic content. So for me, much to the surprise of some, I think this is an A, this album.
I thought as much, actually. It's not a surprise. Tyler, go ahead.
Why do we have a death metal album and a black metal tier list? Just joking
It's
around.
not a death metal album. Come on.
it is pretty close at times in how it approaches riff structure. So there is a kind of almost a core structure of death metal, in my opinion. But yes, it does attempt to use a sort of dark melodicism. It's death doom shoegaze. Yeah, that's perfect. Good job, Raphael. Anyway, there is a black metal like dark sense of melody, obviously. And it is uh competently used here. So I do think that it is a quality album, but kind of like everybody felt about the vastly superior Svartalvheim by Ancient, it's not really doing anything that justifies me listening to it more than better albums like Svartalvheim by Ancient, which is an A album. Anyway, I've said my piece. I would put it at a
No,
C.
no bitterness there.
Raphael.
Well, I think this album achieves a type of melodic black metal at a level of maturity that is rarely achieved. I do agree that Sacramentum did it better, and it's the supreme reference in this type of music. But this one, I think, is I think it's more unique than Tyler was giving it credit for. I think there's a lot of songs and moments where the mastery that they have over the music is clearly in evidence. I think that the way they it does take a lot of intuition to be able to compose and to bring all these elements, the more melodic Iron Maiden-ish type of sound with the harshness of black metal and the whole nature worshipping theme, the more tremolo picking mode, like the more flowing riffs. So yeah, I think it's a very well achieved record. I would give it a B.
All right, how does that equal out? Is that between a B and a C? I think so.
So you and Tyler was C, I was A, Raphael B. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about right. All right,
Yeah.
so we got a S tier album here. Just moving that up next to that.
Yep, I agree. S, let's go to the next one.
All right, we do need to talk about it, especially listeners on Spotify. I just moved up Emperor and the Nightside Eclipse. One of those timeless albums. And yeah, the Emperor, they've never been able to regain their footing after it. Even though they have released, spotty, good albums afterwards, but the In the Nightside Eclipse is the epitome of what Emperor was going for, and it's like their truest statement. Timeless classic, the way the keyboards mesh with the riffs and very narrative structure. I know we've been saying the word narrative in this episode today, but like the Burzum, there are like into the infinity of thoughts, like the recapitulation of the main first riff isn't brought back for like 5, 6, 7 minutes, and it's just very, very flowing music. And can't say enough good things about this album. I always revisit it when I do listen to black metal, perhaps even more than the Burzum, just because I feel that Emperor is more of a broad statement of black metal and what they're expressing. And Burzum, it is very personal once you get into it, and the communication between the shapes that's there is very specific. Emperor, I feel they are a little bit more accessible. They do have an orchestral, that's the birth of the symphonic black metal essentially on this album. And a lot of the symphonic black metal bands, they try to get close to what this album accomplishes, and they don't come anywhere near close to that. So yeah, definitely S tier for me. I would place it next to that Burzum. Different moods and mindsets that I'm in dictates which I would put above the other here, but they're both very great classics, and they will stand the test of time. Shelley, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I completely concur. I think this is an S album, and I think putting these two next to each other, Burzum and Emperor, is a real testament to one of the reasons why the Norwegian bands were so special. Taking like, Burzum, Emperor, Immortal, and Darkthrone, all of them were doing something entirely distinct, but within a genre that's considered to be quite specialist in a way. And just to illustrate what I mean, when I was talking about the Burzum album, I was talking about the economy of ideas and the amount of artistic complexity he gets from very, very simple ideas. Emperor's the converse of that, in that there is so much music in this album. Like, there's such a quantity of information. And again, it's that marriage of like the texture and the production is so sort of outrageously atmospheric and reverb drenched, but also just compositionally that we mentioned the orchestral aspects, but also there's a lot of dense riffcraft going on. But unlike other bands that attempt something similar and just end up coming off as a little bit of a mess or unfocused, like there is an ironclad administration going on here. Like the discipline of the ideas, like although there is every moment is so dense, they're organized in such a way that they build to something. And you mentioned the recapitulation on Into Infinity of Thoughts. You've got the Majesty of the Night Sky that builds to this wonderful finale where everything just drops out and you just have this synth line. I Am the Black Wizards kind of speaks for itself as well. These moments where all of this information is kind of drawn in and just built to this boom, this finale that is just compelling. And yeah, never bettered by Emperor, never bettered by, as you mentioned, the symphonic black metal movement. This is another one of these albums that gave rise to a lot of shit within black metal, a lot of hokey, cheesy Disney crap. But again, we can't blame this album for that. They didn't know that they would end up creating one of the sort of worst aspects of the genre into the late 90s. But yeah, much like Burzum, but for entirely different reasons, a perfectly balanced, perfectly crafted album. And yeah, absolutely belongs in S tier.
All right, Tyler.
Fenrir once made the baffling statement that Emperor was bad because they were a direct copy of Darkthrone with keyboards added.
That's retarded.
Yeah,
that's stupid.
Absolutely. I never understood that comment because
Fenrir said that?
Yeah, Fenrir said that.
He's from Latin America. He probably doesn't understand the Nordic stuff. I'm joking. Don't cancel me. Third time today I've had to say don't cancel me. So I'll be on better. Well, let me just say, this morning I ate 5 eggs. And it may just be the eggs in me that's...
Well, we all know eggs make people more prejudiced, so...
Yeah. Well, anyway, I do apologize. I know who Fenrir is, and he does love the South American bands. So go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, it baffles me because I don't understand how he could draw that comparison. Perhaps there's some sense in which the album has some influences from Under a Funeral Moon and maybe Transylvanian Hunger in part. But as Shelley alluded to, there's such a quantity of information in the different techniques used and the different riff shapes that are used. One of the things that's impressed me the most about this album is the ingenuity that the band has when crafting riffs. Some of the ideas that they have, I've thought to myself while listening to the album, wow, I would have never come up with that. It's got that, as I put it before in a previous episode when talking about Norwegian black metal, that wildcat genius where it opens itself up to utilizing elements that if you were going for a more standard or traditional metal approach, you probably would have never touched upon. And while it did sort of found the symphonic metal genre, almost no follow-ups in this style have attempted to broach that level of almost avant-garde experimentation to widen the palette with which to express your theme. A lot of the follow-up bands, in fact, have really just only taken from Emperor the most superficial outlook on the aesthetic, which is, oh, this is black metal with orchestral sounds on the keyboard. And because of that, a lot of follow-ups have been very boring because that's about all they have to offer. Emperor has breathtaking moments of power on this album. One of my favorites is the one that Jason mentioned with the recapitulation of the main theme. It is almost perfectly placed within that song to create a sense of a return to a familiar moment with a new perspective, given the development that occurs between the introduction and the recapitulation. And there's many more similar moments of breathtaking power throughout the course of the album. So it deserves in every respect an S ranking.
I agree with that. And I wasn't just shitting on, Fenrir because he's from Latin America. That was just a little joke. But anyway, moving on, Raphael, what do you think of In the Nightside Eclipse by that Emperor?
Well, this is a very personal album for me. I think this was my main gateway with black metal, and well, yeah, I agree with the consensus. I think that not just in terms of the music, but the way the world building that is created here, through the lyrics, the whole, well, the world building in general, the aura that they managed to create is near sublime. I remember when I was listening to this album for the first time and re-listening a lot of times. There was a moment where I was listening to it pretty much every day, and I remember being really, I think the proper word is enchanted by the world that they created, just these dense landscapes that they carved in sound. Yeah, well, I think in terms of just sheer songwriting, they're probably the best of the Norwegian bands. There's the song constructions are just incredible. The way they manage to communicate this epic grandiosity, and the way the songs move between these so many different sections with such such intuition. Basically, it's one of those albums where it's one of those very rare, very few albums where I've listened to it so many times that it's pretty much burned into my mind. I think I memorized pretty much every single riff and moment, and many of those are really powerful moments. You guys were talking about the recapitulation in the first song, which I agree it's a great one, but there's so many other good ones and great ones. The intro towards the Pantheon, the Majesty of the Night Sky, just in general the world building and the density of the album is just I think it's definitely a masterpiece, and for me it's one of the best. This might be going a bit far for many people, but I would put it as, because of the personal relationship I have with this album, and because I think it's generally so well crafted, and the vision is just so strong. I would place it among the best metal albums that I've listened. So yeah, of course, an S.
All right. Yeah. We seem to really agree on the F tier and the S tier. It's everything between those two that we kind of get into discussion about. So this is another one of those. And you guys, I understand this is the best Enslaved album, but I fucking hate this band. And
Whoa.
Jason, what did you do? I can't. Hang on. Let me minimize this. A C? A C? All right. Well, I'm going to let you explain yourself.
Well, I every time I try to listen to a slave, I have to turn it off because it just gets on my nerves. And this one, I understand is competent. I'm going with the zeitgeist behind this album, right? That's why I placed it as a C and not an F. But there's like really hooky keyboards on this album, and when I say hokey, it's very, very generic, run of the mill. I understand this was early when black metal was, being developed, and this was new territory back then. But there's just nothing to it. Oh my goodness. I've tried numerous times to get into Enslaved, and it just does not do anything for me whatsoever. Shelley, what are your thoughts?
So I detest Enslaved, or what they became, but I quite like Frost. I adore this album. I think what's interesting is, outside of the music, they were incredibly young when they made this. I think 14, 15 years old, because they were quite a bit younger than the other sort of crop of Norwegian bands. They were sort of the babies of the scene. And this album came out of left field as far as, like, when you contextualize it with the latest discography, but we're judging the albums before us. And for me, they achieve a similar kind of efficiency and minimalism that Burzum achieved, but from a more explicitly folk or Viking orientation. And I think the way the riffs flow, and you get this really basic like contrapuntal interplay with the keyboards as well, is really hypnotic and really trance-like. And again, there's only 5 tracks on this album, I think, 4 or 5, and they're all, you know, fairly lengthy numbers. And the way they slowly build incrementally to these moments of revelation or whatever, again, is a work of genius. And I can't quite believe that it came from the minds of people that weren't out of high school. Like, yeah, for me, this is at least an A. I think it's stands apart in their discography, and was a really unique take on black metal at the time, and it belongs in the canon alongside the greats of Darkthrone and Burzum, Emperor and Immortal for me. So yeah, definitely an A.
Tyler.
Yeah, I'm going to also put it as an A. I think this album is, you could call it a truly Viking album, not just in aesthetics that it uses folk instruments at times or folk styles of guitar, or it tries to make a use of kind of medieval style of melodies in the keyboards, but that it creates in all aspects of the music these vast spaces that have a heroic feel to them, not just in the sense that it's triumphant, but that it gives you the sensation of being on a plane where the only meaning that's imparted to you is through the consequences of your actions. So you're given a kind of freedom, so to speak, that is outside of society, where there's a subtext to your album, to your actions, and you can just do what you will and measure the validity of what you do by what it visits upon you. And I think that Enslaved masterfully captures this emotion. Rather impressive, as Shelley stated, for people so young, with this album. The sense that even just in the pure technique, how the melody moves despite the blasting percussion, in a sort of very sweeping, slow sense. This album to me is Enslaved's finest work. I would say it's an A album. I would only not put it in an S because I do think that other examples of Norwegian black metal from the time period, like Burzum and Emperor, are superior. But Enslaved comes very awfully close with this work. So an A album for me.
Yeah, when you guys were talking about like the acoustic instrumentation that's in there, I do like that aspect a little bit. I mean, not the acoustic guitars or anything like that. Just like this, like really strange, like I forget, it's like a horn or something like that. Whatever, but that did strike me as pretty unique towards the expression they were going for. Raphael, what are your thoughts?
I love this album. I think it's besides in the context of Viking metal, if you can call it that. I think there's a lot more depth here than pretty much everything that's been done in that genre. I think more than just a one-dimensional heroism, for example, even though you also have that element here. The album is I think it's profoundly nostalgic. In fact, that's probably the most distinctive mood that I feel in it. It feels very much like a meditation on the past, or trying to tune into this genetic memory, maybe. I just love the songwriting here, the style, and like Shelley was saying, and Tyler, it's really impressive that they managed to do it at the age they did, or in any age, honestly. The only fault I can see in this album really is the fact that, and this is something that I've seen that other albums by this band do incur into it as well, which is that it's a bit repetitive sometimes. Some riffs do go on for too long, but I guess that's just part of the atmospheric mode of expression. But in general, yeah, I think for me, it's an A.
All right, I think that puts it between an A and a B. So next up is Gorgoroth, Pentagram, and I really love this album. I love the Antichrist too. I would place it between an A and an S. Yeah, definitely higher than the Darkthrone. I feel that Gorgoroth has a timeless aspect to it that Darkthrone and Enslaved doesn't have. I do believe they are limited in the their abilities as musicians, and this is like the best, most sophisticated type of expression they can do, which does hold them back because Burzum has a very idiosyncratic type of expression, and Emperor has a vast technical ability. Gorgoroth is definitely beneath that. I don't think they have like a truly idiosyncratic expression, but they do have a type of execution to their art that it verges on really being timeless, and it's definitely above the Enslaved and the Darkthrone. There's songs on this album that are truly wonderful that do belong in S tier. But because I don't view the whole album as a classic, I am putting it between an A and an S. Chili, go ahead.
So obviously, I think Darkthrone and Enslaved are misranked. I think these all belong on A tier for me, including Gorgoroth. And I think the thing that Gorgoroth got right on this album, I really rate their first three albums in general. I think they're absolutely fantastic and hugely underrated, actually, in the canon of Nordic black metal in general. Pentagram in particular, because the aspect that Gorgoroth got right that these other bands maybe didn't express so well is the rage. And whenever I listen to this album, I picture the musicians in the practice studio working through these songs because the album's barely half an hour long. And it's just plug in guitar, bass, drums, vocals, go. And it is so primal, so rage fueled. But again, unlike a lot of expressions of rage within black metal, there's a real like cognition behind it. There's a real kind of intent behind it. And Infernus is here. He's a very intuitively melodic guitarist. It's not just anger. It's not like grindcore, but there's a real kind of malevolence behind his use of melody and his contrast of very rich melodic material against atonal kind of barrages of primal black metal. And yeah, you can kind of work yourself into an intoxicated ritualistic fury listening to this. And yeah, you're right. Like everything on this album flows through you like a bolt of adrenaline, and building up to the final track, Mannesgeigen Slave, or however you pronounce it, where that's almost like a symphony. It's sort of compositionally, it competes with Emperor in a lot of ways. The sheer momentum.
The only song that they wrote better than that is Heaven's Fall.
Yeah, and it just the way it flows out of them, almost like the musicians themselves have been possessed by like some occultist energy. It's like they're almost having an out-of-body experience. And as you're listening to it, you can just picture the moment of just this raw intensity. And I think that's if I had one criticism of these other albums that we've ranked, which some of them are near perfect, is that raw intensity and that raw energy and adrenaline that Gorgoroth get across here, that again many bands have tried to imitate in the black metal form over the years. None of them have come close to what they're doing on Pentagram. But for me, because we've got Burzum and Emperor in the S tier, I think Gorgoroth Pentagram is an A, but a really, really strong A for me.
All right, Tyler.
Yeah, this album's an F for me. No,
Fucking hell.
No.
Okay, you had me there.
I'm playing around. I would also put this album as an A, a very strong A. Between S and A actually might be the more appropriate ranking for it. And Shelley covered just about all of the bases. Gorgoroth really revels in the sort of meaninglessness of the world. You could say, in not just a sort of fatalistic sense of, oh, nothing matters. So
would you say that the Darkthrone Transylvanian hunger is more like a urbanite type of nihilism, but
that's what you said.
But the Gorgoroth is just sheer nihilism. It's not. It's just
yes,
nihilism.
Absolutely. And while I disagreed with you on some of the, analysis of Darkthrone's Transylvanian Hunger, I do wholeheartedly agree with you that Pentagram is a superior album. I definitely listen to it far more often than I do Transylvanian Hunger. And I think that Gorgoroth is sheer nihilism in the sense that it's not just a statement meant to create an emotional response of being dejected that the world is meaningless, or using it as an excuse to be self-serving. It's reveling in the meaninglessness in the sense that you're no longer enslaved to, as I spoke of when talking about enslaved. Funny redundancy there. You're no longer enslaved to the subtext of society. The meaningless of the world now sort of opens you up to a freedom of looking at your actions more so as a chain of cause and effect. And there's a power to be found in that. I think that's a power that Shelley was speaking of when he talked about the moments of raw intensity. And I think those raw intensity moments, they're revelatory of that realization, so to speak, of the emotional experience of the freedom that's felt when you start to look at your actions in that way, which is something that I think that all of the best black metal somewhat has in common, even though it approaches that idea from different perspectives. But Gorgoroth does it in a very spectacular way on Pentagram and on Antichrist. And I think that the ranking of it is, as I said before, very appropriate. I would also put it as a strong A, or between an S and an A.
All right. Raphael.
Tyler was joking, but I'm not. This is an F for me. No, of course not. Well, I think this basically Gorgoroth seems like the archetype.
I'm sorry, Raphael. You guys have a really deadpan way of getting your humor across. It's like, oh, it's just I'm just joking. All right, go ahead, Raphael.
Well, I was just saying, this seems to me, this seems like the archetype of, satanic Norwegian black metal. I think it's at least for me, when I try to think of the basic image I have of that genre, it's this album or this band in general, the early phase of it that comes to my mind. Well, I think it's they really nail this more this type of primitivism, where paradoxically a sort of mysticism seems to come forth. I think there's this I really feel with this band this sense of being liberated into a sort of void where you can feel this demonic energy, where you find it and then feel it pulsing through you. And yes, it's definitely their most. I think this early phase is one where they really nailed this type of this archetypal type of black metal. It's probably their best statement. But again, like Shelley, I don't think it belongs quite in the company of the Burzum and the Emperor. So for me, it would be right beneath that. So an A.
All right, so I believe like really strong A's equals between an A and an S. So I'm just going to leave it there. So slightly below the Emperor and the Burzum, but higher than the Darkthrone, a whole category above the Darkthrone. So next up is the Graveland. We got Carpathian Wolves. I believe the aesthetic that Graveland has is wonderful, especially early Graveland, up to Memory and Destiny, which we discussed last episode. This is definitely an A for me. There's great tracks. It's very flowing music whenever I listen to it. It hits all the marks that I want from black metal. However, I do view the Gorgoroth and the Burzum and Emperor being a little bit more classics and timeless in that aspect. So a strong A for me for the Graveland. And I do have to mention this same year, 1994, when Carpathian Wolves came out, the Celtic Winter came out. But the reason why Celtic Winter is not on this tier list is because it was a demo. So this is the full length that Graveland put out, which I actually think it's superior than Celtic Winter. So strong A for me. I do think I know conflicting views on Memory and Destiny, but definitely one of the best albums post the year 2000, and definitely close to S tier for me. So Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I know I disagreed with you on Memory and Destiny, but I don't think anyone would deny Graveland are like one of the real workhorses of black metal in terms of consistency, in that, he was part of the second wave of black metal, but he was consistently releasing quality material well into the 2000s, which most of these artists didn't manage. I tend to rate Thousand Swords and Following the Voice of Blood a little bit higher than this one. But there is a sort of compelling, as we mentioned on here, there's sort of occultist mysticism going on here. The production is a little bit softer. The guitars are a little bit weaker, but it leaves more space for the synths and also darkens vocals to come through. And he really does nail this sort of, well, as it is in the title, this Carpathian sort of mysticism where there's an interlude, I believe, in the middle of the album where it is just the sound of wolves, maybe a baby crying, and Darkin doing his ghoulish like black metal thing. And not only is that it's quite funny, but it's also quite terrifying and atmospheric in a way. And it's kind of emblematic of how this album functions for me. Is it basically takes an element of Emperors in the Nightside Eclipse and peels back the layers and sort of really expands on one particular facet of that album, and that's the symphonic, frigid sort of atmosphere. So, and he really kind of expands on that here. But yeah, for me, really sound album, but not quite as up there as some of the other stuff we're talking about. So yeah, I'd be satisfied with an A. I might have placed it as a B, but I think, yeah, between A and B for me.
All right, Tyler.
Well, I'm a personal huge fan of Graveland's early material. I think that there's a sort of almost dreamlike obscurity about it that creates a sense of mystery and adventure. I'm very happy that Shelley mentioned Emperor in the same breath as them, because I think that Graveland has some similarities to Emperor, some that go unnoticed by both its fans and others that are aware of the group, especially in the kind of melodic bridging that they use to connect riffs. But they definitely go for an almost ambient effect of using a sort of distinctive looping that creates a sense of familiarity that has the impact of creating almost more of a landscape in music rather than just a sort of a linear stream of information. And I think they accomplish that pretty well on Carpathian Wolves. Not pretty well. I think they accomplish it excellently. It's one of the Graveland albums that I listen to most often. I tend to just listen to their early discography, and that's everything up to about Thousand Swords all together very often. I would say that I think the Celtic Winter is superior, and if the Celtic Winter was on here, I might put it up more between an A and an S, but I think this album is definitely deserving of an A ranking.
All right, Raphael.
Well, I might disagree slightly about which phase of Graveland's career to give the accent to, because I think that this particular album, well, I think it's very solid, and it has the particular qualities of this band, which are very unique, are in display here. This, as Tyler was describing, this sense of mystery and sort of primordial excitement, and sort of stepping into an ancient world that's just coming forth through almost like a rite. This is all of this is well done here, but for some reason I still think that this is almost a preparatory album in their career. I think that what they would go on to do later is more, let's say, fleshed out. This one, by comparison, is a bit rough on the edges, I guess. For instance, I'm more of a partisan of Thousand Swords, for example, or even the later stuff that he went on to do when he took a more of a melodic direction. But yeah, it's still a very good album where all of these characteristics that we all love about Graveland are in perfect display. For me to be more of a B, but I guess I'm content with the current position.
All right, all right. So, yeah, I believe that puts it between an A and a B, next to that Darkthrone and the Enslaved. Let me get the computer situated here. Do what I want you to do, computer. There we go. No, don't turn off the screen. Yeah, there we go. All right.
Don't question me. You're a computer.
It's not doing what I want it to do. Okay. I think I fucked up somehow. No, it's just taking forever to fucking load. All right. So next up is the Impaled Nazarene. And I'm of the mind where Impaled Nazarene kind of blew their load early. with the Numbs, Tours, or whatever it's called, and Ugra Karma. I would put this. I can't pronounce it. The word Finland is in the title of the album. I would.
Painkiller.
Yeah, what Shelley said there, and yeah, I would put it between an A and no, probably just a B. Probably just a B. There are some really killer tracks on here. However, I feel that compared to the earlier Impel Nazarene, it doesn't have the same punch. Granted, this is still a very fucking strong album. Um, I guess in 1994 it was more of a Norwegian year than a Finnish year. But anyway, I do have to step away for a brief minute, and I'll let Shelley be the host, and Shelley can tell me where it's going to be ranked when I get back.
So yeah, I was actually surprised Jason put it as a B. I would have put this as a C. If Ugra Karma was on offer, I would have ranked that as an A because I think it sort of competes with Gorgoroth for encapsulating the essence of really well composed melodic black metal, but injecting it with that out of body rage, that intoxicated occultist rage. But Impaled Nazarene obviously come at it from a more sort of grindcore perspective, which was sort of emblematic of Finnish black metal. I mean, Beherit went actually strangest to not necessarily grindcore, but that primal like black and thrash kind of style does inform Beherit as well. But in terms of this album, I think, as Jason alluded to, it is a step down in that it's another one of these bands where it's a statement of rage, a statement of animalistic like intent that you can't really maintain for more than 2 or 3 albums. And there are really quality moments on here, but it is a bit patchy and a little bit unfocused for me to rank it higher than a C. So yeah, what do you think, Tyler?
I would also put it as a C, maybe even as a D or between a C and a D, because this album was a real disappointment for me. It has that sort of straight ahead blasting melodic style that they were doing on Ugrokama, but it combines it with an almost reminiscent of Venom style rock rhythmic expectation that is also used very discontiguously, to where there doesn't seem to be much planning in how the songs are unfolding, almost like they were just churning something out to make a black metal album. And because of that, the album really doesn't form a continuous listening experience, and it's often uninteresting, if not even annoying or frustrating at times. So yeah, real downgrade for Impaled Nazarene. And while there are some aspects of their discography from this point forward that I can find admirable or even enjoyable, I do think that this album was the beginning of a downward spiral for the band.
Well, yeah, actually, now you mention it, I think I remember reading that the band actually themselves don't like this album. They sort of saw it as a bit of a compromise of them trying to dilute their style and bring it more up to date, but without really succeeding. And as with any kind of compromise, whether it's between the record label and the members of the band themselves, if you're doing something for practicality's sake rather than artistic sake, then it's going to sort of lead you up a wrong alley. But then again, I think they sort of saw the follow-up Latex Cult as a return to form, which for me was like the beginning of Impaled Nazarene becoming one of these sort of joke, extreme metal bands, along with like Agacocker and things like that, where it's sort of they become almost a sort of not a meme, but a little bit of a sketch show artist. Whereas I think the first 2 albums were, yeah, and I think the first 2 albums were sort of tapping into something a little bit different. But yeah, sorry, Raphael, what's your take on these guys?
Well, yes, about these guys, I think I agree with you guys about especially the earlier album, but about this particular album, I guess I'm a bit more negative than the overall consensus, to be honest. In fact, out of all the albums I'm seeing here, this is probably the one that I would rate the lowest, maybe one of the lowest. I mean, not the lowest because we had the Abruptum, the Cradle of Filth, but I do appreciate a lot of what this album is trying to do, and it's very clear that they are good musicians. They have a lot of musical chops, and that shines through in a lot of tracks. I'm thinking of, in particular, the Blood is Thicker Than Water track, which is quite a good
that's
one.
an awesome song. I love that song.
Yeah, exactly, and I really appreciate the melodicism in that track. But overall, for the entirety of the album, I think they do indulge a bit too much into the rock and rollisms, and that will draw away spirit of just not metal and beer, or maybe even punk or rock and beer. I'm not sure. I think I would probably give these, like, I guess I'm more towards Tyler's judgment. I would give it probably between a V and a C.
Oh, and what was your ranking, Philly?
So me and Tyler put it as a C. So I think that places it firmly as a C.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't view it as a bad album, but yeah, compared to what came before, definitely not as strong. Ooh. So we have Opus Nocturne from Marduk next. Just like I was one of the kids who liked Marduk early on. I have a Plague Angel t-shirt when that album came out. I liked it, but as I've gotten older, I've seen through the ruse. So yeah, this is F territory for me. I know
Really?
Opus Nocturne is perhaps
Jason, judge the album, not the band. What do you think of Opus Nocturne, not Marduk?
Oh.
I like look at it. It's a death metal cover. We're talking about black metal. And,
Okay, but
all right, maybe a D.
Well, you included Dawn on this list, so I mean, we've already had some death metal bands on here.
Yeah, Tyler. Honestly, my personal opinion of this album that it is excruciatingly average. So my honest opinion would be a C.
okay, fair. I can talk. I was going to rank it a B. Again, much like Enslaved, it's an album that stands apart from their discography. We can all agree Marduk are one of those bands whose reputation is really unearned, and for some reason, hordes of shit munchers kind of flock to them. I don't know why, but this album stands apart because again, it really nails something similar to Gorgoroth's Pentagram, although not nearly as compellingly. In that, it does get that raw energy and that flow of melodic content. It's like a stream of conscience in a way. But there are moments of sort of revelation throughout. But I totally agree. It's not nearly on par with, say, Gorgoroth or even Transylvanian Hunger as sort of comparable albums on this list. But I would have put it between a B and a C for me.
Yeah, I'm looking at C tier, and I listened to that Beherit way more than the Marduk.
Okay.
And I view there's more artistic merit in the Bethlehem than the Marduk.
Well, I disagree with that, but let's get Tyler and Raphael's take.
All right, Tyler, go ahead.
Well, this is what I would consider the best Marduk album, but I don't ever listen to it. The kindest thing I could say about it is that, at least on this album, the band is able to use not totally predictable tonal progressions. Most of the appeal of the album, and I use the term appeal loosely, is in the blasting fast percussion and rhythm riffing. And because of that, to me, it doesn't have a lot to offer. I would probably put it as a C simply on the grounds that I reserve D and F more for albums I find ranging from bad to outright garbage. And I don't know if I would necessarily say this album is either of those things.
It's the best album from a garbage band. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Exceedingly average, it encapsulates it pretty well. That's about all this album accomplishes is, hey, you did a good job at being okay.
All right, Raphael, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I guess I'm going to diverge a bit from the consensus here. I think this album has that really primal kind of orgiastic energy, but at the same time with some relatively surprising sophistication in terms of songwriting. There's a lot of, when I first listened to this album, going by Marduk's reputation, not just being bad, but being not that, complex in terms of songwriting. I remember being really surprised because a lot of songs here have relatively elaborate structures and with a lot of, I think, emotional resonance and intuition. I'm thinking, for example, of the title track was almost a gothic ballad, basically. But not just that, even the normal, really rageful black metal tracks. Some of them are quite long and with a lot of sections that are interlocked very well, I think. Overall, I really like this album, to be honest, independently of what the band did on other releases. So for me, it would be a B, a very resounding B.
And Shelley said a B too, right?
No, I'm firmly in a C. I'm a strong C category.
Yeah, we're seeing a B, Raphael. I do apologize for that. That it's not meshing with your personal views.
Okay.
De Mysterious Dom Sathanas from Mayhem. The final.
What's this band? I've not heard of them.
Some people call them Gayhem, but I do not call them Gayhem. I call them Mayhem, like the logo is written with the M.
Have you ever heard of Morbid Angel, Shelley? They're a pretty cool band.
Morbid Angel.
Are they a Pantera ripoff though?
No, a Necropolis ripoff, according to.
They're a Pantera ripoff on Gateways.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot of ire for this album in this crowd. So, I will say when I revisit this album, when I'm in the mood for it, that it is A tier. However, I think overall, this was the album that was, late to the game. There was far superior albums put out in 1994, as you can see from this tier list. I'll put it between an A and a B because there are really fucking great songs on this album. It's more straightforward in your face type of black metal, a little bit knuckleheadedy. However, I know Shelley will definitely elaborate on Attila's vocals. I've met Attila and I love the guy, and I know he does like opera on the side, and you can tell where the beginnings of that came from on this album, where he just gets into really obscure type of eerily singing. But yeah, I would put it between an A and a B, probably just a B. Yeah, I think a B is proper for this compared to Transylvanian Hunger by Dark Funeral. Yeah, I think that one
Darkthrone.
Better.
Not Dark Funeral.
Oh, Darkthrone. Yeah. Sorry, I've had a couple beers, but yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was deliberate.
I think Dark Funeral. No, 1995 they released like something. So, that'll be interesting once we get the Dark Funeral because of what they turned into. But Shelley, what are your thoughts on that Mayhem, not the Gayhem?
So I'll caveat by saying I'm not interested in the Euronymous v Varg like psychodrama thing. I rank the albums that I see before me. I don't care that much about personality politics. I don't think there's a Burzum v Mayhem camp that you have to fall into. I just think Euronymous was an incredibly interesting guy, as was Varg, and they're both compelling individuals. With that said, as I mentioned in our Mayhem Focus episode, I think Euronymous was a much more talented scene organizer and administrator than he was a musician. He got the founding personalities of Norwegian black metal inspired, and he sort of lit the fuse. He was not able to craft as compelling artistic vision as the people that he inspired. So in that regard, he is still a pivotal figure within the development of Norwegian black metal. But the actual output that kind of followed from the reams of rhetoric we get from Euronymous about all of this stuff that he believed black metal should be did not square up to a Burzum or an Emperor and Immortal or a Darkthrone. But it should be noted, one, the songs on this album were written a few years before the album was actually released. And two, yes, you mentioned Attila's vocals. They're actually one of my favorite things about this album. I think it's almost funny when you first listen to it, but having grown a lot with this album, I think it's another one of these performances where it's never really been properly imitated or like capitalized on. Some people have tried over the years, but kind of left me feeling a little bit cold or a little bit like I'm being sold some sort of hokey novelty. But Attila, bless him, he's a unique vocalist in a number of ways, but here he goes hell for leather in terms of just delivering the most unique, ghoulish piece of almost like spoken word drama over the top of what is, for me, like an above average, very good black metal album. So yeah, people want to say, Funeral Fog, whatever, they were written, I should say, before some of the classics of the albums that we're talking about here. But for me, they're really good black metal, but Euronymous was just not quite able to realize his vision in a way that Varg or the members of Emperor or the members of Mortal and Darkthrone were. So for me, this is a strong A-B album. Belongs between B and A for me.
All right. Yeah, he did say that he was a communist because that would kill the most people if adopted.
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of bullshit that he came out. But the other thing I didn't mention, sorry, is Hellhammer's drums on here are exceptional. I think the drumming is not particularly technical in a sort of, suffocation kind of way, but he does, like, he can lay down a really tight blast beat and sort of nail these really rolling fills that kind of unsettle the rhythmic orientation of the track in a way that other black metal drummers are not capable of doing, because Hellhammer's sort of, trained in jazz and stuff. And I think that really does elevate the album to, a little similar to what Faust was doing on In the Nightside Eclipse as well. But yeah, it does like lend another element to this album that I think does put it on A tier for me.
Tyler, what are your thoughts?
I think this album gets a lot more flack than it deserves, maybe partly due to the melodrama and the scene politics surrounding it at the time, and the legacy of black metal after it. But I actually really enjoy this album. Early on in my black metal listening career, I did not listen to this very often and did have somewhat of a disdain for it. But over the years, I've actually become rather impressed with the sometimes strikingly dark moments on this album. I don't think it's as strong of a contender as even Graveland, let alone Burzum and Emperor and Gorgoroth. But I think it's a much better black metal album than it often gets credit for. And I do think it's a style of black metal that in some ways, sadly, wasn't nearly as explored or imitated as what was pioneered by Burzum or by Darkthrone or by Emperor. I think that when talking about Euronymous being a better scene organizer than a musician, I think that the power of this album really is probably more a product of collaboration than it is purely of Euronymous creativity. The fact that there were several good minds involved in its creation from
Snore. Snore.
Yep, Snore, for instance. Hellhammer, in part, Dead, lyrically, and even controversially, Varg Vikernes.
Yep.
So I think that those people kind of lent a lot of energy to this album that made it more of a sum of its parts as far as the personalities creating it than simply a testimony to Euronymous songwriting abilities. But yeah, I think that this album is actually really good. It deserves a second listen by people who may have dismissed it for other black metal albums. It may not be as good as the best of the genre, but I think it's better than a lot of other black metal albums that I would consider merely solid. So I would say between a B and an A, maybe even an A at its best. But yeah, definitely between a B and an A works for me.
All right, Raphael.
I think this album is the perfect balance between the more atmospheric type of black metal, the more based on the flow of the riffs of usually tremolo peak, and the more savage and elaborate riff craft. And I think it's a very good combination. It's probably, I still think it's, out of all this scene, it's one of the best statements that came out of it. It's probably the closest that we have to a Norwegian black metal supergroup. What was here on this album with Vargon the Vase, Euronymous, Attila, of course, with his unique vocal style, and also contributions from Snorri, etc. Overall, I think the end result is really well done. I think the it's an album that has a very unique identity, and one that's very close to a bit like I said for Gorgoroth, but in a bit of a different sense, almost like the crystallization of what I associate with the term black metal and the type of emotions and auras that entails. Yes, I think it's one of those albums that if it really on the right mood, it can hit very, very powerfully. Um, Great songs and just a really great sense of atmosphere. For me, it's an A.
All right. The people have spoken, and I believe this averages out to an A. Since I put it between an A and a B, I think Shelley said an A, but could be between an A and a B. And
A and a B for me.
yeah. So I think that goes to an A. Interesting, right next to that Graveland. That is life. It's not pleasant being alive. It's scary sometimes. Sometimes you have to compromise on things. But non serviam by Rotting Christ. All right, all right. I know this album is held in very high regard by many people. Not me. Myself, I do like some of the songs on this album, like the Fifth Illusion and things like that. But the type of melodicism that is presented in front of us with this album is very basic. It is a very bare bones, basic understanding of melodicism, and it wears thin over a while. And you can tell with the keyboards that are in this album that they don't know what the hell they're doing on keyboards. So I would place this straight into the C category. I know Shirley has to jump off soon. I understand we've been going a while here. But yeah, I do think it's very strong in some aspects, but it does run together. And the aspects, the character of the album is not very unique to me. I believe the type of melodicism that is displayed in here can be picked up by an average Joe. So yeah, not very special. Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny that like Rotten Christ are one of the most famous Greek black metal bands, but they're also one of the worst. If you take them alongside Varathron, Necromantia, Zamael, Agatus, they're out just pound for pound. Their output has been really inconsistent, and it's really only the first EP and Thy Mighty Contract that are up there as far as like timeless black metal is concerned. Non Serviam is almost like an aftershock from Thy Mighty Contract. Like you can hear the echo of some of that genius in there. But it's a little bit more unfocused. It's a little bit more pompous and poppy in places as well. And famously, obviously with Greek black metal, there's the heavy metal euphoricism in there as well. There is going to be that what's the word? That rock kind of residual within that sound. But in Non Serviam, it really does come through far more than Thy Mighty Contract. So for me, I would actually agree with C because there's enough of the DNA of the original genius of Rotting Christ in there. Some of the melodic content's really compelling. I find some of the songs very, very captivating and uniquely atmospheric, but it is way more unfocused, way more slapdash than Thy Mighty Contract. It's way less flowing, and you can sort of see the blueprints for Rotting Christ becoming this kind of stadium gothic rock outfit that they would become in the early 2000s. So yeah, for me, C is probably about the kindest thing I could say about it.
All right, Tyler.
Yeah, I prefer to call this album non-Thy Mighty Contract because it sounds like a watered down version of that album. Like it's just basically taking a really superficial idea of the melodicism on that album and running with it. It's not badly constructed, but it doesn't have the more exciting development that Thy Mighty Contract has. So while it's not outright bad, I think that it's average enough that I would also agree with a C.
All right, Raphael.
Yeah, well, not much to add here. I do think that the Mighty Contract is quite an achievement. I remember being very impressed the first time I heard it. This one, yeah, by comparison, is a bit more derivative. Yes, it's well, I agree it doesn't really have well the same surprise factor as that album. Yeah, C is good, I think.
All right, that puts it firmly into the C territory. All right, next up is Ceremony of Opposites.
Sorry, Jason, before we move on, can you just move Mayhem next to Carpathian Wolves so it's not overlapping Gorgoroth? It's bothering me.
It's been bothering me too. I'm not the only one.
Thank you. That's it.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's better.
All right. So yeah, I'm placing that firmly in S tier. I have listened to this album more than any other black metal album out there. I know all the words to it, all the songs merge together perfectly for me. And actually the Baphomet's Throne is actually my least favorite song from this album. That's the one that's most popular because they made a music video. But I feel like this is the album that completely meshes with me on a personal level. I understand it's very subjective, that there's a little bit of a hard rock type of drumming and vibe with the song construction. And it is also short, so there's not like a long-winded expression. It is, around the 30-minute mark. However, I feel that this album it just meshes with me on a personal level. Beyond this is my gateway into black metal, and I just hold it as such the best from Samael. I understand that blood ritual may be your forte here on this program, but you can actually hear a little bit of blood ritual in the riffs. They're played a little bit faster to mesh with the faster tempi. But yeah, definitely S tier for me. I know this album inside and out. It is one of my favorites ever written. Yeah, Shelly, go ahead.
Nope. This is C tier. For me, so as well as being a black metal, death metal blogger, I'm also a huge fan of Rammstein, but Rammstein activate the lizard brain in me. And I think this Samael album activates the same part of that brain in that it's very rhythmic, very groovy, and it does have those really kind of sugary synth flicks as well. And I absolutely adore this album, but it is the non-intellectual part of my brain. It's the Rammstein part of my brain that's activated. And I think on an artistic level, Worship Him and Blood Ritual, the debut, really far superior as far as what Samael were going for in the true inheritors of Celtic Frost. And to some extent, kind of echoing what Rotting Christ were doing in presenting this alternative to the Norwegian style as far as like this primal dark black metal was concerned. I alluded to Samael when we were talking about Bethlehem as well. I think those two are the superior albums. Ceremony of Opposites, quality album, but it is pop metal for me. So it does not belong anywhere near Burzum and Emperor. So C tier.
Freaking travesty. A travesty. Tyler.
All right, let's continue this travesty. C tier. I think this album is good, but if you had said Worship Him and put it in an S tier, I would come much closer to agreeing with you. Maybe even Blood Ritual, although I would put that more in an A. But yeah, because of the sort of
would you consider Blood Ritual to be black metal though? That's interesting. Like Blood Ritual is like black metal, but not black metal riffing at all.
Yeah, it has the spirit,
like
which arguably in black metal sometimes is all you need, but it does have a very doom metal approach to riffing and to song construction. Yeah. I agree with you on that. Worship Him is my favorite release by this band by far. I listen to that album rather frequently, as a matter of fact. This album is good, and I do enjoy it when I listen to it, but it does have a slight creep of mainstream rock into its sound that puts it on a lower tier than many of these other greats, and definitely puts it on a lower tier for me than their earlier material. So I would.
I understand Passage. If you were to have the same commentary for Passage, that would make sense for me. But there is the narrative structure to the songs here and Ceremony of Opposites. So I would not place it in mainstream rock at all.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's like a complete mainstream rock album and that it's bad. I do think it's a good album. I think you can just hear elements of that starting to creep into their sound with this one. Um, so yeah, I think it's good. I wouldn't put it any lower than a C, but for me, it would be a C.
Okie dokie. All right, Raphael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you can see that they're definitely engaging in a very in a much more commercial territory on this album. But I think at the same time you can see that the band is very comfortable with that. At least that's the feeling I get from it. I think you can see that they know which buttons to press. They're overall very comfortable with this new form of expression that they found, and I guess that's why they continued on that path, with Passage and the later stuff. So yeah, I think it's a very solid album, but I also agree with Shelley and Tyler that it's just not that good, in terms of artistic genius. I guess B is the most I would give it, but I'm more tending towards the C as well.
All right, so I put an S, and you guys, I think that averages out to what a C and a B in between there. All right.
It's the greatest discrepancy so far, I think.
Well, it's a very personal album for me because I did get into it when I was very young and didn't have discernment. I can understand being older and coming into it and seeing that it may not have the powerful appeal as a Burzum or Emperor, but I do have like a very strong attachment that's personal to that album. But I'm going with the popular vote in between a B and a C. And since Samael is so low, it only makes sense to put Satyricon in F tier next
I
to
roughly agree.
Cradle of Filth. Shelly, where would you place the Shadow Throne by Satyricon?
You're gonna hate me. So Dark Medieval Times is famously unfocused in that you get one passage and then they just sort of stop playing and then just go into a different passage. A little bit like an Opus song in that you're just listening to a riff and they're building momentum and they'll just stop and go into some sort of acoustic thing and it's like you've just skipped a track. Satyricon, they got over that with the Shadow Throne. But what became apparent is a little bit like a lot of the bands we're talking about here is they're trying to emulate their betters. They were younger than the other sort of the silverback males of the Norwegian scene, but unlike Enslaved, they were unable to translate that youth into sort of a compelling artistic statement that just didn't sound like a facsimile of their betters. And the Shadow Throne is like it's a concoction of a bit of in the Nightside Eclipse, uh, maybe moments of Darkthrone and Burzum, definitely moments of Enslaved on there as well. But that being said, I don't think it's entirely terrible. I think this is probably the best Satyricon album, and Satyricon first three albums, they're not terrible. I think this belongs between a D and a C for me. Yeah, I know that's to the ire of a lot of people, but I credit where it's due. There is some value here, I think. And I do listen to this album every now and then.
It's the riff salad of Satyricon that kills it for me. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
The tragic thing about Satyricon is that on their better material, I feel that it's obvious that they sincerely understand the spirit of black metal, but they simply can't express it themselves. They
Yeah, sorry,
try.
that's what I was trying to. Sorry, Tyler, to interrupt. That's what I was trying to say. You've just hit the nail on the head with what I was trying to get at.
And yeah, they try, and you can hear that they are making authentic attempts to convey that spirit, but they simply can't. So music may have not been where they could have most effectively put their energies if they are the kind of people, which I feel the material proves they are, who do understand that spirit. They may have been put to better use elsewhere, perhaps in writing or something along those lines or organizing. Um, but in that regard, I do feel that their best material isn't terrible. However, it's so lacking in conveying something authentically their own that I don't see any reason to really ever listen to it. And so I would definitely give it a D ranking.
All right, Raphael.
I'm not very fond of this band overall. Well, I do agree that their intentions are good and their art is in the right place. Like Tyler was saying, that they sort of understood the spirit of the genre and the aesthetics as well. But yes, I think they just couldn't quite pull it off, especially on the first album, which I think has a lot of simply jarring transitions with blast beats and then flutes out of nowhere. So you can definitely see what they were trying to go for, but it just doesn't quite gel together. But I will say though that this album, despite everything, is a massive improvement. I think the songwriting is much more consistent. You can definitely tell there are actual songs here with a sort of a purposeful course. The way the transitions are handled are much more purposeful, much more consistent overall. Yeah, I think this was a great triumph for them. And to be honest, despite all of the faults that I found with this band, I guess I would give this a C, honestly.
All right, a C, two D's, and an F equals a D. Let me move that up there next to that Abruptum. All right, Zibalba, the poop album. This is the only black metal album that has the word poop in it. So
It's also brown, so
it is brown. So
So this is grindcore, actually.
Yeah, fecal grind.
fecal grind. Oh, all right. Yeah. So I don't think it's terrible. I think it's very average black metal. So I'm gonna put it into the C category for you gentlemen today on the Necropolis podcast. The poop in the sea. All right, go ahead, Shelley.
This is a B. This is a really great album, and I think one of the reasons it's great is it conveys it uses the same vocabulary as all of the sort of Northern European bands that we're discussing, but because this band are Mexican, they call on the ancient history of that nation with the same vocabulary, but they manage to convey an entirely different atmosphere. It's very cloying, very claustrophobic, very like like sweaty and hot and close. But all of the elements of what we'd recognize as black metal are there in terms of the trebly guitars, the raw drums, the lo-fi production, and so on. But all combined with that is this very simple but very unique sense of melody. But also they combine that with a really effective use of repetition, where they really convey what it would be like to be within a tribalistic ritual of some kind, where you kind of lose your sense of self and your sense of purpose, and you're intoxicated by the moment. And I think, given the lo-fi austerity of this album, it's really effective at communicating that. I think it's obscenely overlooked within the canon of 90s black metal, possibly because it's from Mexico, which we don't normally associate with black metal. I wouldn't put it up there with, Mayhem or whatever. I don't think it's quite that good, but I return to this album a lot, and I think it's really underrated. And anyone listening that hasn't heard of this album, I'm putting it in B for a reason, and I highly recommend you go and listen to it.
All right, Tyler.
there's a really interesting trend with Southern European black metal of making use of more sentimental melodicism. And I'm not saying that as a criticism either. It can oftentimes be utilized
I
very
view
well.
Swedish melodicism as very sentimental, but go ahead.
Yeah, it is very sentimental in a kind of different way. There's more of a certain kind of melancholy in Swedish sentimentalism that I think differs from the Southern European variety. But there is crossover between the two as well, and you can even see that in comparing some of the bands. But that I do think that's an interesting trend in Southern European black metal, and I think that interestingly, this album by Xibalba also has a similar style of melodicism. I guess that culturally that would make some sense, not just given its geographic location, but also being that it has ties to Spain loosely through the sort of history of Mexico.
Would you call this album sentimental though? I don't think it. Sentiment isn't what I get from it.
I think it is in parts. Like I said, it's a different kind of sentimentalism than like the melancholy sentimentalism of Swedish black metal. Although I think there is some crossover between the two. But it may not utilize the same techniques as what we frequently associate with sentimental black metal, with lush harmonies. But I do think it has a somewhat sentimental style of melody at times, something that verges almost on romantic. But it does also have a lot of similarities to, I would say, probably the Panzerfaust and Total Death era of Darkthrone. Um, and but it's a little bit more uniform than Darkthrone is, both to distinguish it from that band and maybe some slightly to its detriment. So they kind of, to illustrate that comparison, they use some melodic overtones to complement, some like consonant directional passages in a similar manner to Total Death. But the album has a lot of energy. It is really enjoyable to listen to whenever I visit it, which is infrequent perhaps, but I do always find myself liking it, like I said, whenever I listen to it. And in that regard, I think that it's worthy of a B ranking.
All right. So, Raphael, what are your thoughts?
I think this is one of those cases where, to be honest, I like the idea and the concept of the album more than the actual execution. Even though the execution isn't bad by any means, it's a pretty good album, I believe. But the way Shelley was describing it makes me that description would be a really great album, very interesting album for me. But I don't think it quite achieves that in practice. Well, as someone, I've been always interested in mythology, and especially as an European, the fact that this band is from Mexico and they're drawing from the Mayan tradition.
Well, Portugal is like the Mexico of Europe, right?
Well, not sure.
I'm joking. I'm just saying
that's Poland.
Don't make Raphael and I unite.
I'm joking.
Solidarity against you, my friend.
All I'm saying is, all right, I'm done talking today. Go ahead, Raphael.
Okay, but anyway, I was saying that being an European, of course, this album brings a sort of a very mysterious, a kind of mystique that's very unique. But I think that for that purpose, it would have helped if the band would have gone for a more of something similar to what Enslaved did on this album that we just ranked. But here, I think the Celtic frostisms, for example, don't quite gel as well sometimes with those more atmospheric intros where they use traditional instruments. Overall, it's still a pretty good album, I would say, but I wouldn't quite give it a B. I guess for me it's between a C and a B.
Yeah, I think that averages out to a C. Unless you guys disagree, I think that was 1B and.
Two Bs. Can't remember what you ranked it as, Jason, but
all right.
I think it's in between.
Yeah, in between next to the Samael.
Okay. I've got to jump off now, but feel free to stay on and discuss the ranking. And yeah.
All right, Shelley, great to have you. That is Shelley from HateMeditations.com and Metal Illusion Magazine, as well as that YouTube channel, Hate Meditations. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment somewhere.
Smash that like button, ring the bell, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Talk. And we also have the wonderful Tyler, great metal reviewer, great insights into extreme metal. Thank you, Tyler, for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed myself today.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. And thank you, Raphael, all the way from Portugal, aka the Mexico of Europe. Just kidding. Thank you, Raphael.
Yeah, thank you again for having me here today.
Yes, sir. And thank you for listening. Again, this episode will be posted on the YouTube channel so you guys can watch the tier list being made. Let me actually present that so it's not in the editing format. But anyway, I want to thank you all for listening today, and hopefully we're able to. I understand that the rankings can be different than our perceptions of things. You know, everyone has different perceptions and takes on things. This is just a specific groups summation of these specific albums, not trying to set this in stone as the holy grail of what is the best and what is the worst from 1994. Just kind of just to generate conversation and move things around and see what happens with different people's takes and all that. But anyway, I want to thank you all for listening and thank you for the continued support over the last couple of years, listening to Necropolis podcasts, as well as supporting at hatemeditations.com. And we will see you next time. Thank you.